This is News Bits on Fusion TV. Here are the headlines. Gunmen storm Libyan parliament. United Nations Security Council lifts ban on import of rough diamonds out of Ivory Coast. South Africa Parliament drops presidential corruption probe ahead of polls. Donald Sterling banned for life by NBA. Abducted girls from Chibok, northeastern Nigeria, likely taken to neighboring countries. These and more when we return. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment. Hello and thanks for joining me on this edition of News Bits. I'm Nikia Roberts. Donald Sterling, the Los Angeles Clippers owner, on Tuesday was banned for life by the NBA and fined $2.5 million. The stiff sanction was handed to Sterling after it was proved that he had made racist remarks to his girlfriend about associating with black people and bringing them to his games. The audio of his comments was originally played by TMZ, but NBA investigations proved that the comments were made by Sterling. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver called the comments truly offensive and disturbing. Current and former NBA players are very happy with the sanction. The United States on Tuesday made a commitment to help Ukraine find and recover billions of dollars in possessions stolen by the former president Viktor Yanukovych and his aides. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, in his remarks at the Ukraine Forum for Asset Recovery, stated that we will not hesitate to use every tool and resource at our disposal to enable Ukraine rebuild, reform, and refocus on its future. Yanukovych was toppled in February after several months of street protests. The United States on Monday imposed sanctions on 7 Russians and 17 companies associated with Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder reiterated that the U.S. was prepared to impose further sanctions if Russia did not stop intervening in Ukraine. Australia is moving closer to an immigration deal with Cambodia. The countries will be in agreement for Cambodia to theoretically take in refugees from Nauru. Although the details of the deal have not been made public, refugees will be allowed to live in the community and will be supported by local community organizations. The over 1,100 asylum seekers called boat people are currently living in camps in the island nation of Nauru. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner for Refugees has expressed concern about the living conditions the refugees will be subjected to, saying resettling refugees in Cambodia will be delicate because it is still trying to recover from a long history of civil unrest and is one of the poorest countries in Asia. The United Nations Security Council on Tuesday unanimously voted to lift a ban prohibiting the import of rough diamonds from Ivory Coast, thereby terminating the sanctions imposed in 2005. The sanction was lifted after the Kimberley process, that is the initiative that regulates international diamond trade, acknowledged last November that Ivory Coast had satisfied its diamond certification scheme's minimum requirements. The country had pushed for this lift since 2011 when its decade-long conflict ended. The Security Council, however, maintains an arms embargo, a financial and travel ban on Ivory Coast until April 30th, 2015. Gunmen reportedly stormed Libya's parliament on Tuesday, forcing MPs to abandon a vote on a new prime minister. Lawmakers left the building after hearing gunshots. The attempted vote followed the resignation of Abdullah Al-Thani, who stepped down as prime minister earlier this month after he and his family were targeted by militiamen. It was not immediately clear who was behind the disturbance. Libya's National Congress has been stormed several times by gunmen over the past year. And Libya has been plagued by instability since armed groups toppled Muammar Gaddafi's regime in 2011. One round of voting was held where 2 out of 7 candidates were selected. However, the second round of voting has been postponed till May the 4th. Some of the schoolgirls abducted by suspected militant Islamists in northern Nigeria are believed to have been taken to neighboring states. There have been reported sightings of gunmen crossing the border with the girls into neighboring Cameroon and Chad. The Islamist group Boko Haram has been blamed for the raid on the school hostel in Chibok town in northeastern Nigeria approximately 2 weeks ago. It has not yet commented on the allegation. Boko Haram leader Abubakar Shekau, in a video released in May 2013, threatened to capture women and girls and treat them as slaves. The government has said the security forces are searching for the girls, but critics maintain it is not doing enough. Boko Haram has staged a wave of attacks in northern Nigeria in recent years, with about 1,500 people killed in the violence this year alone. The Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta signed a controversial bill making polygamy legal. Polygamy was previously illegal under civil law but was accepted under customary law with the consent of the first wife. The new bill makes it legal for a man to marry more than one wife without an existing spouse. Female parliamentarians reportedly walked out of parliament disgusted as their male colleagues voted on the bill last month. Christian leaders are also said to have opposed the bill before it was signed on Tuesday. As demeaning as the law has been said to be, it did provide women with a 50% claim to property acquired during the course of a marriage and bans marriage for those under 18, among other provisions. South Africa's ruling party has postponed a parliamentary inquiry into corruption allegations against President Jacob Zuma. The African National Congress says the committee does not have time to consider the matter before the May 7th general elections. 6 weeks after South Africa's top anti-corruption official issued a 400-page report detailing how Zuma used $23 million of public funds to renovate his private home, an investigative committee in Parliament, which met only twice, dropped its inquiry. The official reason being not enough time before voters elect a new National Assembly and provincial legislatures. Zuma's deputy in the ruling ANC party dismissed opposition allegations that this is a political dodge. Postponing the inquiry is a very practical decision, said Cyril Ramaphosa, who will be the nation's second in command if the ANC prevails in the elections. Opponents of the ANC have criticized its record on unemployment, corruption, and service delivery to poor South Africans. Many analysts expect the party's margin of victory in the elections to be smaller than normal, but the party of the late Nelson Mandela appears to retain a hold on most South African voters. Earlier, we talked with a couple of South African business and political analysts who gave an insight into the ongoing activities. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this segment. Vishay Singh, Executive Director of South Africa U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Derek Jackson, the President of South Africa U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, to jump right into it, South Africa was until recently the largest and most developed economy in Africa, and it is the 28th largest in the world, now overtaken by Nigeria. What do you attribute to the downgrade for South Africa or upgrade for Nigeria, as the case may be? Vijay.
Thank you very much for that question. It's an interesting question. Derek and I were discussing something like that when we were traveling this way. One of the things we feel is that the diversity that exists in South Africa right now and the problems within that diversity is what's causing the country to stumble. So people, the different cultures and the differences still within the communities, and there's a lack of unity and more of a segregation that could be one of the elements that's causing an issue of growth. Over and above that, we had major strikes, we've had problems in the mines, and we have a discrepancy around high numbers of unemployment, which causes a country like South Africa that has huge potential to fail, and whereas Nigeria is a united force, there is no diversity in terms of culture or people, and that unity is allowing them to leaps and bounds achieve and grow as an economy.
I think that part of the problem is attributable to the fact that the incumbent government has not capitalized or seized the opportunities in their favor. And I think it's got a snowball effect, and that's why we have what we have today.
Well, going by the figures, 52 million people in South Africa. Poverty level remains high, gross inequality, and high unemployment rate. Has the government's black economic empowerment done much in real terms to close the gap between the rich and the poor, Vijay?
Again, a very intriguing question, because if it has done anything in terms of BEE or black economic empowerment, it has done it to a small percentage of black people versus the masses of the country. We find 10 million people still unemployed. We still find that there's a specific amount of companies, black economic empowered companies that continue to win contracts and continue to grow, yet the opportunities for small, medium businesses are still limited, and the opportunities for the masses to gain some share of this economy is not there. So I personally don't think it has worked to the intention of what it's supposed to have done. It may have worked for what I would call a diamond or a smaller percentage of black people in the country.
Do you think this has bred corruption in any way?
Absolutely. I think there's a tendency of the government to have what I would refer to as a small group of Illuminati, and these guys have made not millions, billions of rands. But it's a very close circle to the detriment of the majority of the population. The discrepancies are amazing in a place like Johannesburg or Sandton. On the one side of the interstate, you can have an infrastructure and facilities that equate to the best we have in the United States. And 500 feet away, you have got guys living in shanties without running water or electricity. So that is a major problem. The few have lifted up, the majority have been left behind, and that's why you have what you have, the dissatisfaction of the people. And I think they're going to effectively speak their minds on the 7th of May.
When the elections will come up, the upcoming elections, since you talk about that, let's go to that. President Zuma largely is seen as the luckiest president to have escaped these scandals. Yet he has a very good chance of winning the election next week. What would you say to that, Vijay?
I'd say he has the power of the masses. He has the gift of the gab to talk to the people on the ground, and he's able to successfully bring those votes to the table. The other parties, I feel, lack in terms of that strategy. There may be one particular party that's coming up right now, headed by Julius Malema, that may have a very similar strategy and may be able to speak to those masses and go right down to the deep rural areas of the country and bring those important votes to the table. And those are the votes that count, because that's the numbers. When we talk about poverty, when we talk about lack of implementation of economic empowerment, that's where the numbers lie. So if you could convince that audience, which Zuma has done in the past and still has a very, very good control of that, he often wears his traditional garments, and he's often involved in the culture that exists within those communities, in those clearly defined areas in South Africa. He's able to bring that home.
But not only have these scandals tainted him, they've tainted the party. And so in terms of loyalty, you still think people will vote ANC Zuma?
That is the $64 million question. I believe that we have to take a very objective view. It's like a tennis ball. After you've hit it, it can go anywhere. So here's the little scenario. Currently, the ANC has 65% of the vote. The DA at the last election got 16%. Now, the ANC is going all out to try and retain their majority, or get as close to 67%. If the loyalty factor comes in, I think there's a good chance they can get over 60%. If the people on the ground remain disgruntled and are objective, I think they're in for an uphill battle. So at the end of the day, I think at this point in time, I would say that it would be a safe call to say that the ANC would probably get between 52 and 55%. The Democratic Alliance, I think it has an appeal to the majority of the people, but I think judging from past performances at 16% and less, if they get over 20% and closer to 25%, they'll do exceptionally well. The outside horse is Julius Malema. It's his first shot at it. With regards to the rallies he's been holding, they've been in excess of 50,000 people at a rally. So there's a huge, huge competitive struggle between the groups, and they all know what is at stake. If he gets over 10%, there's a problem.
Stay tuned for the concluding part of that discussion. South Africa has seen significant brain drain in the past 20 years. How much damage do you think this has done to the country, to the economy, and has this directly affected growth in the economic sector, do you think, Vishay?
I think yes and no. I think there's always the ecosystem of a balance. You have a brain drain, and then you have the incomings as well of other countries. South Africa had the BRICS policy in place where educated, good, skilled people could come into the country and add value to the country. So there is an influx and an outflux, but overall you can say the yes part of it is it does impact, because by the time the skills that you lose and the quality of that skill of those people having grown in the country, they know what's best for that country. And when you lose that, there's a certain element that goes with it that contributes negatively to the growth.
Now, is there a true figure reflected in the number of South Africans resident in the U.S.? Do you think, Derek?
That's a very speculative question, a very good question, because it's been a topic of discussion of late. The South African embassy in D.C. estimated to be around 83,000. But then if you look at the numbers being bandied about in Atlanta, we're looking at anywhere between 25 and 40,000. That's one city. So our feeling is that there's probably in excess of 200 to 300,000 South Africans residing in the United States.
And talking about the numbers, the large numbers or the official numbers, what would you say about diaspora voting? Is that something that is real and relevant at this time for this dispensation?
Another very good question. There's a problem surrounding that, because the South African population in the United States has to a large extent been excluded from voting due to logistical problems. So if you live anywhere, let's say in Atlanta, and you wish to vote, you actually have to fly to the embassy in DC to go and vote. There's no consul in Atlanta. So I think to a large extent, no one's going to pay $400-500 to go up and down. It's an expensive vote. So in London, I'm told that we have about 700,000 South Africans and only 10,000 have turned up to register. That was just a figure that I read about recently in the press.
Now, I read a recent publication, and I spoke to a number of people who have offered their opinion that they're not going to vote in this election coming up. What is going to be the relevance of this withholding of votes to this dispensation?
I think any individual holding back a vote does not help the country or does not help a situation at all, whether good or bad. The importance to vote and the importance to get out there and put your cross in what you believe in, you have to remain foundational on your belief and your hope. That foundation which Nelson Mandela helped bring us into a democracy, and those fundamental foundations, is important for people to remember that versus what may be, as Derek says, transpiring on the ground right now, because everything is subject to change. And if you do not vote, you're only contributing to the problem rather than helping solve that problem.
Let me say this, closing this segment out, and I'm going to have both of you comment on this. I'm going to read this where I saw a publication. In August 2013, South Africa was ranked as the top African country of the future by FDI magazine based on the country's economic potential, labor environment, cost effectiveness, infrastructure, business friendliness, and foreign direct investment strategy. What does South Africa need to do to ensure economic staying power? I'm going to start with you.
I think they have to create an environment of security and stability. There has to be an outreach to the international community, showing them that law and order prevails, that the investments made by multinational corporations are safe and secure.
Vijay, in answering that question, also address the fact that is the current leadership, they're committed to growth, to ensuring growth.
I think if we take it 2 steps back and even just answer it from the 4 pillars, that pillars which Derek was speaking about, healthcare, education, crime and policing, and housing. If you look at the education system, I believe it's in a shocking state. And why I say that is that if you take an example of schools in Cullinan, you have classrooms where the white kids go to a particular classroom to learn, and they learn in the Afrikaans language. And the black kids would have to go to that same school and learn in a separate classroom in an English language, but taught by white teachers who don't understand the culture. So is our current government addressing the actual problem? The problem is at roots level, and that grassroots level of what did we fight for? What sort of freedom did we fight for? What sort of integration did we fight for? So the minority is still having certain privileges, and where we're supposed to have a democracy and we have to have the integration, we are certainly lacking. And if there's if there's a level of segregation based on language, then we're going to have a divided country. And a divided country means that we've got no unity from an economic perspective. So what's the sense of writing a great strategy in English, writing a great policy in English, having the best legal system in English, and nobody can speak that language? And none of the youngsters coming out there, which is your majority, would understand that. But if our current government is not interested in addressing those problems and addressing those core issues and letting things be, simple thing like segregation of language within a school, and saying that that school is a multi-cultural school, doesn't work, because you are now having some form of apartheid based on language. You're even having apartheid based on where white teachers will go and teach and black teachers will go and teach. So you got no cross-pollination.
All this is left to be seen, though, in the upcoming elections. It'll be interesting to see the results of those elections, and we'll have you guys back to also give an analysis of all the different events and activities leading up to the elections. I want to thank you again, gentlemen, for coming on the segment with us today. Vijay Singh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Derek Jackson, thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, on Newsbits this week, Fuxion TV Network, Atlanta's multicultural station, had its official ribbon-cutting ceremony in the week with Ambassador Jeffrey Tenielabi, Nigerian Consul General in Atlanta, performing the formalities. Here are some of the highlights of the event.
Gentlemen and ladies, thank you very much for this warm welcome and reception. I'm very delighted to be here, to be part of this success story. On behalf of the minorities, African American community, African and Nigeria in particular, I cut this ribbon for the good of all.
Well, thanks for staying with us on this edition of Newsbits. We'll see you again next time. Until then, stay safe.